Hello guys, welcome to the biology lesson. This is the biology lesson 14. In today's lesson, we'll be looking at the respiratory system. Alright, so what is a respiratory system? We are saying this is the system used for gaseous exchange. So the respiratory system is the system used for gaseous exchange. So we are saying gaseous exchange is the process of uptake of oxygen and release of carbon dioxide. So you know living things need oxygen and also need to get rid of carbon dioxide out of their body. So the process of uptake of oxygen into the body and then the getting rid of carbon dioxide out of the body is what is known as the gaseous exchange, and it occurs in the respiratory system. All right, so we are saying it occurs in the organs of the respiratory system. All right, so let's look at the organs of the respiratory system in animals. The table below shows the respiratory organs in different animals. All right, so we have this table here. So here we have the name of animal, then here we have the respiratory organ. So here we have fish, and then the respiratory organ in fish are gills, then we have operculum, then we have also mouth, and then in insect we have the spiracles, then the trachea and the tracheals. All right, then in human beings we have nostrils, trachea, bronchi, then bronchioles, then alveoli. All right, so let's look at mechanism of gaseous exchange in insects. So we are saying that because insects are mostly terrestrial or land animals, they have adapted an exoskeleton to deal with the problem of dehydrating resulting from water loss. So what I'm trying to say here is this: I'm bringing out the fact that insects are terrestrial animals or land animals. They are animals that are found on the land, and because of that they have adapted a skeleton we call the exoskeleton, the skeleton which is found externally and the flesh is found inside. All right, so such a skeleton is called the exoskeleton, and the insects have got an exoskeleton to deal with the problem of dehydrating resulting from water loss. So insects are very small and they contain small amount of water, and since they live on the surface of the land, then to avoid them losing water by evaporation that can cause dehydration and make them die, then they have got an exoskeleton that is covered with a cuticle that prevents loss of water from the body of insects. Then we are saying that while offering protection against dehydration, the exoskeleton also acts as a barrier to gaseous exchange. So meaning that these insects find it difficult because of the exoskeleton. It has made it so difficult that gaseous exchange can just happen anyhow. All right, so we are saying to deal with this problem, insects have also adapted a tracheal system for gaseous exchange. So now to deal with this problem, now insects have adapted a tracheal system for gaseous exchange. So we are saying the tracheal system is a network of the following tubes. So it consists of spiracles, then trachea, which is the trachea singular, then also the tracheals. All right, so these are now the tubes that consist the tracheal system, which is the respiratory system in insects. All right, so what are spiracles then? We are saying spiracles are openings located in the thorax and abdomen through which air enters the body of the insect by diffusion. So now on the surface of the body now, especially the thorax, which is the middle part of an insect, and the abdomen, which is the tail part of the insect, on the surface of these parts of an insect you find openings called the spiracles, and it is through these openings that now air or oxygen enters the body of the insect by the process called diffusion. So let's look at these insects here. It looks like a bee, right? Yeah. So now what are spiracles? So spiracles are these openings here. They are small openings and they are hardly seen with a naked eye. I think they can only be seen using a microscope. So they have small holes on this part, which is the thorax, and on this part, which is called the abdomen. All right. So equally, when you look at the grasshopper here, it also has the same. So it has some spiracles, some holes. If you come across one grasshopper, try to look at it closely. You find it has some small openings on its body, and those are called spiracles through which air enters the body of the insect. All right, so we are saying that the next is the trachea. So we are saying that uh, the trachea, a network of tubes that traverse the entire body of an insect through which air passes from the spiracles. So now when air enters an insect through the spiracles, now it has to pass through these tubes here. These tubes here are what we are calling the trachea. That is trachea, which means singular, then trachea, which means plural. All right, so air, after entering through the spiracles, now it moves through the body of an insect through these tubes called the trachea. All right, then also on the grasshopper here, we can see that it contains these lines here, which represents actually the trachea. Apart from the trachea, then we have this one called the tracheals. The tracheals. All right, so we are saying tracheals are smaller tubes through which or in which trachea divides into. So when the trachea actually goes inside the insect, then it divides into smaller tubes, and those smaller tubes are what we call the tracheals. All right, so now we are saying that these tracheals are the sites for gaseous exchange in insects. So let's look at this diagram here again. So as usual, this is a grasshopper, and then you can see an arrow pointing this way. So it has picked this part here, zooming it so that we can see properly. So let's say this one is the spiracle here. There is a spiracle there. After zooming it, this is the spiracle, the opening through which air enters. Then it passes through this trachea here, and you can see the trachea now moves across the body of the insect, and then it divides into these smaller tubes. These smaller tubes are the one we are calling the tracheal. The tracheal. So these smaller tubes now, they connect to body cells, all right? And that is where gaseous exchange occurs through the tracheal or the tracheoly. All right, so now let's look at again how this insect can be brought. So sometimes in an exam, an insect can be brought like this. Maybe it is not labeled, but what you should know is that this part here labeled here, the first openings here are called the spiracle. Then after the spiracle, there are those tubes that are passing like that. That one is called the trachea. Then those that are going inside the body now, those that are entering inside are the one we are calling the tracheal. All right. Also, you can look at this insect here, which looks like a fly. Similarly, you can see that it contains some trachea, which are these tubes that are passing there, and the spiracle, the openings. All right, so now let's look at how gaseous exchange occurs in insects. How gaseous exchange occurs in insects. So we are saying that oxygen from the atmosphere enters the insect's body through the spiracles by diffusion. So oxygen in the air or atmosphere now enters the insect's body through the spiracle by the process known as diffusion. Then it moves inside the insect's body through the tubes called the trachea. All right, so it will now start moving through the insect's body through the tube known as the trachea. All right, now we are saying from the trachea, oxygen goes to the ends of the trachea called the tracheal. So from here, oxygen diffuses into the respiring cells. At the same time, carbon dioxide diffuses out. So now I've explained the process of gaseous exchange in insects, in which I've said actually that the oxygen enters the body of an insect through the opening called the spiracle, and then it moves through the tubes in the body of an insect, and these tubes are called the trachea. And then this trachea, from the trachea it continues until the trachea divides into smaller tubes called the tracheal, and it is through this tracheal where the gaseous exchange takes place, in which now the oxygen enters the respiring cells, and then carbon dioxide moves out of the respiring cell into the tracheal, and then into the trachea, and then outside the body through the spiracles. All right, so I hope you understand this process. Now let's look at it. As usual, now let's look at this now tracheal system of the insect. So now we are looking at the tracheal system. So let's say here we have the opening called the spiracle, and when air enters, it passes through this tube now called the trachea, and then this trachea divides now into several tubes, smaller one called the tracheal, and then from here now you find that when it goes now here, it continues moving. Now at the end of the tracheal, you find that there's a fluid. So air dissolves into this fluid, and then after it dissolves in the fluid now, then it goes into the tissue. In this case, there's a muscle, and there it goes for respiration. And then what you should know again is that oxygen in insects does not pass through the blood as it passes in big animals like human beings. No, in insects it doesn't pass through the blood system. It only passes through the tracheal, which is just tubes that do not have blood. All right, so let's look at gaseous exchange in fish. So we are saying fish obtain their oxygen from the air dissolved in water by using the gills located in the gill chamber or opercular cavity. Yeah, so you know fish are not terrestrial animals, they are just water animals. And then how do they get the air? Because they also need air, for which is oxygen, for respiration. So they get their oxygen from the water, and this water now passes through the gills, and the gills which are located in the gill chamber, and it is through the gills where now oxygen from the water enters now the gills. All right, so we are saying that the gills are covered and hence protected by a semi-circular flap called the operculum, or the gill cover. So I think you have ever seen a fish before, and then above on the sides of the head of the fish, you find that that's where the gills are located inside. But on top of the gills are covers. All right, those covers which protects the gills are what are known as the operculum, all right, or the gill cover. So each gill is made up of a caved bone bar called the gill bar or gill arc, to which are attached a large number of filamentous outgrowth called filaments, called gill filaments. All right, so what is being said here is this, that each gill is made up of a caved bone bar called gill bar or gill arc, to which are attached a large number of filamentous outgrowth called gill filaments. I think you will see these in a moment. All right, so we are saying the gill filaments provide a large surface area for gaseous exchange. So this is what we are talking about. So this is the fish here, and this fish is open, whose gill is open, meaning the operculum is removed. This one here, it has been taken away. So what we are saying now here is this, that when we look at these filamentous outgrowth, these filamentous outgrowth, these which makes up the gill, are called gill filament. All right, then after the gill filament, there's this bone here, which we are talking about as curved bony bar. So this is a curved bony bar, which is called the gill arch or the gill bar. Then after that, there are those which are known as gill rakes, which are assisted to remove particles from the air. All right, so the gill filaments provide a large surface area for gaseous exchange. Let's look at this fish here again. I think this one again makes it clear. So these are what we are calling gill filaments, and then that white part there, it is what we are calling the gill arch, and then those to my black small outgrowth are what we are calling the gill raker. All right, and then if we picked one part of the gill and look at it as this one here, these are what we are calling the gill filament, and then these to my small outgrowth here are what we are calling gill raker, and then the white thing here, the bone to which these gill filaments are attached, is what we are calling the gill bar or the gill arch. All right, now let's look at the process of gaseous exchange in fish. So now we are looking at the gaseous exchange in fish. So we are saying water enters the gill chamber of fish through the mouth or bowel cavity and comes out through the operculum when it opens. Note that there is an operculum on each side of the head. Yeah. So now here, what is being explained is that water enters the gill chamber of a fish through the mouth. That's where air enters through, water. It enters through the mouth and then comes out through the operculum when it opens, when the operculum opens. Then we are saying there are two operculum on each side of the head. All right, so during inspiration, which is breathing in of oxygen, first the mouth opens, causing the volume of the mouth and the gill chamber there, I think I left the gill chamber, increase. So during inspiration, first the mouth opens, causing the volume of the mouth and the gill chamber increase. At the same time, the operculum closes, so the pressure in the gill chamber decreases and water-rich in oxygen enters the chamber. Oxygen then diffuses into the blood while carbon dioxide diffuses out. Now, this is what we are talking about. Let me just bring the diagram here. So what we are saying is here. So inspiration is this process here. So inspiration, the mouth opens, then the water goes in. So this oxygen water rich goes in here, and then these sides here of the fish, which closes the gills, the covers of the gill, called the operculum. When water is getting in, these are closed. The fish closes them. Then after now what happens now is that the mouth now expands, and also this space inside here called the gill chamber also does what? Does also expand. So now when the gill chamber expands, water passes here, and then since it passes through the gill, gills. Then oxygen now diffuses out of water into the gills and then the blood of the fish. Then carbon dioxide diffuses out of the gills into the water, and then the water comes out. So when the water now enters through the mouth, now it comes out through the gill, the operculum, and then the mouth here closes. Here the mouth is open, as you can see, but here the mouth here is closed, but the operculum is opened as the water comes out. So this is the expiration or breathing out. So breathing out water is through the operculum. All right. So what we are saying again here is that during expiration, now expiration is the process when now the fish now is breathing out the water. So we are saying the mouth closes, causing the volume of the mouth and the gill chamber to decrease. At the same time, the operculum opens. The pressure in the gill chamber increases and water rich in carbon dioxide exits the chamber. So now pressure increases. It's the one that actually pushes the water out, and then together with the carbon dioxide. All right, so let's look at now gaseous exchange in human. So we are saying gaseous exchange in human occurs in the organs shown in the diagram below. So these are the organs here through which gaseous expiration or respiration or exchange occurs in human being. All right, so we have the nasal cavity, then we have the external nostrils, then after this we have the pharynx, then the larynx, then we have the trachea, then we have the lung, then we have the bronchi, then after the bronchi we have the bronchioles, then we have the pleural membranes, then we have external intercostal muscles, then we have the internal intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. So these are the organs through which gaseous exchange in human takes place. So now we are saying that what is the nasal cavity? So nasal passage. So we are saying this is the passage, or this is the passage. Yeah, forgive me for not actually editing this one properly. So nasal passage, we are saying this is the passage leading from the nostrils, lined with the moist mucous membrane. Yeah, so it is the passage leading from the nostrils, lines with mucous membrane, meaning it has some membrane like a skin inside it, and that skin is moistened with the mucus. All right, so we are saying now we look at the pharynx, and then we are saying the part of throat that separate passage for food, esophagus and the air. So this pharynx actually is part of the throat that separate passage for food, which is esophagus, and the air or trachea. So it separates the trachea and the esophagus. And then we have the larynx. So here we are saying this is the voice box containing vocal cords. Even as I'm talking, the voice is generated from the larynx. All right, next is the trachea. We are saying the tube with rings that takes air from the throat to the lungs. It branches into two bronchi, one to each lung. All right, then we have also the bronchi singular, the bronchus. So we are saying the trachea branches into two narrow tubes called the bronchi. One bronchus goes into the left lung, the other goes into the right lung. All right, then broncho, then we have the broncho. We are saying each bronchus further divides into smaller tubes called the bronchioles. All right, so from there we are saying next is the alveolus, then pleural alveoli. We are saying bronchioles end in structures called alveoli or air sacs. A network of blood capillaries covers the alveoli. All right, so let's look at the nozzle or the thorax cavity. So we are saying the lungs are protected by the rib cage located in the thorax. So the thorax is actually the chest. That's where we find the rib cage, and then the lungs actually are protected by the rib cage. So we are saying the rib cage consists of ribs joined together by intercostal muscles enclosed at the bottom by the sheath of muscle called the diaphragm. Right, so this is it. We are saying the rib cage consists of ribs, and these ribs are joined together by intercostal muscles and then enclosed at the bottom by the sheath of muscles called the diaphragm. All right, so this is what we are talking about. So you can see that from the larynx, vocal or voice box, we have the trachea, and then the trachea now divides into the bronchus, one on the left and right, and the other on the left. And then this bronchus again divide into smaller tubes called the broncho, and then at the end of the the broncho, we find the alveoli, which are the air sac. And then you'll see that we have this part here through which the lungs are covered in, called the rib cage, and consisting of these are ribs. So we have ribs, and then ribs are joined by these muscles, which are called intercostal muscle. Actually, there are two types of muscle. We have what we call the external intercostal muscles, and then the internal intercostal muscles. You are going to see them in a moment. So let's look at now ventilation of the lungs, or rather breathing. So we are saying the movement of air into and out of the lungs is called ventilation. All right, so that's what is called ventilation. So breathing, in other words, is also called ventilation. All right, so we are saying let's look at the first part called inhaling or breathing in. All right, so what does it involve? We are saying that the diaphragm or the diaphragm muscles contract and pull it down. So during this position here, we have this here as the cavity or the rib cage. So rib cage, during breathing in, we are saying the diaphragm muscles contract. So meaning they become tightened. So they become tightened, and then they do what? Pull it down. So they are pulled down. So you have seen here diaphragm pulled down, pointing it down because it contracts. And then when it does that, we are saying the internal intercostal muscles relax. So as I said, that you see in the moment internal intercostal muscles. So these are ribs. Let me get maybe the pointer, something like this. I think maybe it will be able to point. And no, not this one. This one is unable to do what I'm interested in. Okay, let me get a black one, black ink. So still more you can't see, but I think you can see this is a rib. All right, so outside it is a muscle called external intercostal muscle. Then inside is what is called internal intercostal muscles. All right, then we are saying the internal intercostal muscles relax. So the internal one will relax, then while the external intercostal muscles contract and pull the rib cage upwards and outwards. So you can see the rib cage, there are these arrows pointing outward and also upward. So once this happens, we are saying these two movements make the volume in the thorax bigger. So the volume here in the thorax or chest becomes bigger, so forcing the lungs to expand. So the lungs as well expand. So the reduction in air pressure. So there is also reduction in air pressure here in the lungs. So the reduction in air pressure in the lungs results in air being drawn in through the nose and the trachea. So there will be air that is now drawn in through the nose and then it passes through the trachea. So this movement of air into the lungs is known as ventilation. All right, so what we have described is just the process of inhalation or inhaling, a process by which air enters the lung. So what we have said is, number one, the diaphragm muscles contracts and then they push downwards or flattens. In other books, that's what it says. Then next, the internal intercostal muscles relax while, the external intercostal muscles contracts, and this pushes the rib cage upwards and outward. So when the rib cage now is pulled outward and upward, then it makes now the volume inside the rib cage larger, and that reduces the pressure. And when pressure inside the and that causes the lungs to expand, and then that creates a low pressure inside the lungs, and that low pressure means air now is invited to go and fill that pressure. So air now enters inside the lung. That's how air manages to enter. So this is what we call now ventilation. Now let's look at now exhaling, which is the process of getting rid of the gas outside of from the body to the outside. So we are saying that the diaphragm or the diaphragm muscles relax, allowing the diaphragm to return to its doomed shape. So the diaphragm muscles relax, allowing the diaphragm to return to its doomed shape. So it's this process being said here. So now the diaphragm now, it will relax. It becomes relaxed or flexible, and when it becomes flexible, it takes this shape which we are calling the domed shape. In short, it moves now upwards. So diaphragm relaxes and returns to its domed shape. All right. Now, what happens next is that the external intercostal muscles relax while the internal intercostal muscles contract, pulling the ribs downwards to bring about a forced expiration. So now it will cause the ribs now to come down. So here the contracted internal intercostal muscles, now they contract inside. Then outside now the external intercostal muscles now do what? Relaxes, and this causes now the rib cage to be pushed downward, and then when it is pushed downward, this forces the air out of the lungs. So we are saying the lungs are elastic and shrink back to their relaxed volume, increasing the air pressure inside them. This results in air being forced out again. All right, so this is what is really involved. To just avoid the video or the lesson getting longer and longer, we are going to end here. So in the next lesson, we'll now complete gaseous exchange in the air sac or the alveoli, and then we'll talk about diseases of the respiratory system, and then we'll conclude and then start a different topic. All right, so for now we end here. Thank you for watching. See you in the next lesson. Bye.